For other participants, I'd like to invite you to write into the chat the traditional owners of the lands that you're joining us from as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bu Anna. To officiate this event, I would first like to invite Dr. Willy Himawan as the head of Visual Art Bachelor's Program to deliver his welcoming remarks. Please welcome Pak Willy.
Thank you, Mbak Ari. Thank you, Mbak Ari. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. Selamat pagi, everyone. Our Honorable Dean of Faculty, Rikrik Kusmara, our Honorable Head of Visual Art Research Group, ITB, Bapak Dr. Tisna Sanjaya, our Honorable Head of Aesthetic and Art Theories Research Group, ITB, Ibu Dr. Irma Damajayanti, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Anna Madeleine Raupach, Ibu Premana Premadi, PhD, Dr. Brad Tucker, Mr. Peter Swanton, Dr. Erika Sikom, Mr. Roderick Pamford, and Mr. Saiful Garibaldi. Our colleagues of ANU, ITB, the Art Institute of Indonesia, students, ladies and gentlemen. In this morning, quite bright morning, good morning from Bandung. Let me welcome you all to one of many seminar that happened in this pandemic era. This seminar is part of ITB's World-Class University Program. It's called a joint seminar that created by ITB, in this case, Faculty of Art and Design, and also ITB's partner university, Australian National University, in School of Art and Design. Art, Science, and Technology, a new creative field, raised as the title to bring closer multidiscipline interaction as global problems demand more creative solution from the rules of various disciplines. In the other side, experience and understanding throughout creative practice in many civilization and era need to be brought up as opportunities in scientific and academic field peculiarly. So the first session of this seminar will raise issues, especially collaboration in the field of art and astronomy. And for the second session, we'll brought up issues on multidisciplinary art practice in Indonesia and Australia. Despite of many flaws within this seminar implementation, I really hope that you all will enjoy the discussion throughout the days. So that's all. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om.
Thank you very much, Pak Willy, for the warm welcome to everyone here. So in our next two speakers in the morning sessions are from ITB Institute Teknologi Bandung. And without further ado, we will head over to our first speaker, Dr. Andrianto Rikrik Kusmara, who also happens to be our dean. So Pak Rikrik holds a doctorate degree in 2011 with a dissertation in media in Indonesian art in 2000s. He has been working as a curator as well for a long time now, and right now he is the dean of our Faculty of Art and Design ITB. He will kind of like set the tone for our discussions today in how the multidisciplinary art is going to be the future of art in Indonesia. Please welcome Pak Rikrik. Pak Rikrik, hello, good morning. How are you?
Oh, good morning. Good, thank you, Bu Ari.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna give it over to you. Have a good talk, Pak.
Okay, thank you, Bu Ari, and good morning, everyone. Friends from School of Art and Design. Australian National University, colleagues from ITB, and colleagues from the Faculty of Art and Design, students, and all participants. Good morning to all speakers, Dr. Anna Madeline, Ibu Premana Premadi PhD. Halo, selamat pagi Bu Nana. Good morning to Dr. Brad Tucker and Peter Swanton, Pak Dr. Tisna Sanjaya dan Saiful Garibaldi. Selamat pagi Pak Tisna dan Saiful Garibaldi. And also good morning to Dr. Erika Sekombi and Rod Bamford. Thank you for joining this event. First of all, I would like to thank the friends at ANU School of Art and Design who continue to establish these good cooperative relationships. Also to friends at Department Astronomy ITB, especially Bu Premadi, Premana, Bu Nana, selamat pagi. Terima kasih Bu Nana. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver the opening remarks for this seminar. Today we are presenting seminar together. I think it is not only because we have a memorandum of understanding between universities, the ANU and the ITB, but also between faculties. It is also inspired by the project proposed by Dr. Anna in the second project with Department of Astronomy ITB. And in some of our missions, we feel that this is right time for us to be able to support and be part of the projects, and also always support by Dr. Chaitanya Sambrani. Thank you, Pak Chaitanya, for your support for us and ITB. And I also thank to Dr. Will Himawan and colleagues at Department of Art for their initiatives to organize this seminar to sharpen the spirit of Faculty of Art and Design in the future interdisciplinary programs. And I think this is the example of activities with ANU is one of the activities will provide a broader exchange for program for us next in the future. Faculty of Art and Design, which founded in 1947, in the middle of the field of science and technology, which is now known as Institute Teknologi Bandung, has a very distinctive character in the development of art in Indonesia. And I think it's growing among science and technology is also very influential in many of the ideas and works of interdisciplinary among students and lecturers in our environment until now. I remember that my late teacher, Gregorio Siddhartha Sugijo, a sculptor, a painter, a lecturer, and one of the Indonesia's leading artists back then, provide quite a lot of inspiration, carry out artistic research activities with the friends from the field of science and technology in ITB. One of the examples that I admire is the work of public sculpture in the 80s in the collaboration with one of the physics department engineer, Professor Andrianto Handoyo, the late Professor Andrianto Handoyo, for producing light effects in his collaborative works. And the latest example, I think, also will be interesting, who also will be the speaker in this seminar, the collaboration between Dr. Tisna Sanjaya and Professor Yahdi from Geology ITB. Pak Tisna also have a water project in Cigondewa, and also other example for us is our alumni, Saiful Garibaldi, who was mostly inspired by science in his works. Today discussion also seems to me to be an example for the art in the context of the Indonesian Ministry of Education program, especially in higher education with so-called Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka, which is the freedom for lecturer and student, especially to develop and realize their vision in multidisciplinary possibilities, while at the same time opening up opportunities for the impossible opportunity, which was previously completely limited, tend to be monodiscipline and centralized. Our faculty also want to expand the knowledge, understanding, and experience through artistic aspect to enrich the perspective of the art world. For example, about the future of nature, the future of the settlement, the future of digital humanity, together with engineers, scientists in multidisciplinary teamwork base, and also the creative exchange process, and also being an active in the part as connections between unrelated things, peoples, or ideas. If you see further opportunities in the future with the support from the ITB and also the rector to continue to develop and fund multidisciplinary programs, I'm sure that samples of artistic project at ITB will be more diverse and challenging in the future, and art will be more active into create adventures to new areas of experience. Last Tuesday, in a meeting with rector, she also hoped that Faculty of Art and Design for the ITB multi-campus project development, and within the complexity of the environment at the Jatinangor campus and Cirebon campus, she hoped that our faculty could also actively contribute, encourage the art sectors to organize collaborative event in those places. Finally, for my colleague at Faculty of Art and Design, especially at Art Department, I encourage to actively involving various parties in various research programs, including continuing to invite NU lecturer and students to develop multidisciplinary collaborations program. So let's enjoy presentation of the speakers today and have a good discussion. I thank all those who support this event, especially the speakers. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much for the speech, Pak Rikrik. It is true, yeah, that we are going towards a future where multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary practices between art, science, and technology becomes the core of how ITB is going to be. And I think that kind of like sets the tone. In this morning sessions, we are going to focus on the practice that has been started since several years ago between art and astronomy. That's what we are going to focus on in the morning sessions. But in the afternoon sessions, that is Indonesian time, I think it will be the evening sessions for people joining in from Australia or Canberra and surroundings. It will then the sessions will be kind of like in other multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary practices between art and other disciplines. Okay, our second speaker is coming also from ITB, and she comes from the Department of Astronomy. It's Dr. Randa Premana W. Premadi. We call her Ibu Nana. Ibu Nana is a researcher in the field of cosmology as well as a lecturer in the astronomy study program at ITB. She currently serves as the director of the Bosca Observatory. And thanks to Ibu Nana's contribution to the world of astronomy, her name was enshrined as the name of an asteroid, the asteroid 12937 Premadi. Please welcome Ibu Nana. Are you here with me? Hi. Okay, can you probably unmute your mic, Ibu Nana? You're still muted.
Thank you.
Hi. Okay, so I'm gonna give the screen to you and then let you do your presentation.
Right. First of all, thank you very, very much for inviting me to this seminar, and indeed for involving me in this wonderful endeavor. And I think also everyone at the Faculty of Arts and Design of Institute Technology Bandung. I think this is a really not only wonderful, but I think it's a courageous effort to put together people from different fields to think, to work, to create something new. And I think it is a very, 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 very encouraging step. And I indeed thank my friends and colleagues, ANU in particular, Anna, we've been friends for years. We've been visiting Boscha as our first artist in residence. We are honored to have artists in our observatory. So hopefully that's a sign for us to work together and just to be mindful of what's ahead of us while coming from various backgrounds. But without further ado, I'd like to share my screen, if I may. Is it appearing properly?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Right. While I was thinking about this seminar, I've been wondering what I would present. And I think I would present myself. It's we as living beings have been moving a lot, moving in space as well as in time. And while doing so, we feel changes in ourselves. We see changes in others, in the environment, and the world, our larger world, has changed. The universe has changed. And most of it we didn't get to see because all those changes took very, very long time, very, very slow pace. But we have seen in this picture that the universe started as something that we cannot decipher. And then long time afterwards, the first generation of stars start popping up. And then one of them will be our sun among other stars. And then will be our planet with our faithful companion, the moon. And then mountains growing, and then oceans got digged, and the atmosphere got put together. And then much, much later, life. And this very slow pace, and then the evidence that wonderful life emerged somehow give me the idea that balance must have persist one way or the other. Maybe different kind of balance, but it seems to be achieved through those changes in space and time. So I was wondering whether discovering balance is a kind of pursuit for me, maybe for others. It is a balance that keeps changing with space and time. So with that, I start and invite you into this wondering. Now, today we're talking about art, science, and technology. So then I have to think about that pursuit in three different perspectives. Maybe different, but not necessarily separated. So art, science, and technology. I've been fortunate enough in my adult life to be mindfully immersed in those three, art, science, and technology. But I must admit that I'm embarrassed that I don't know deeply enough about any of them to be able to describe what each of them actually what is their blessed duty, their role in humanity, in civilization. So I don't know whether it's fair enough to assign one verb to each of those, art, science, and technology. This is only my second slide, and you probably already have criticism towards me. Arts, for example, do all of them. Science do all of them. Technology do all of them. Arts need to know something before they know what to express, and while doing so, it is a service to humanity. So I guess each of art, science, technology does all that. But the idea today is when we work together, we have to know what our specialty is in a way that we know how we can contribute, how we can construct together in collaboration. So I like to dig further what art, science, and technology individually serve the humanity, but also how they could work together. So I'm learning. So would science, technology, and art constitute the fabric of civilization? Would we say that? Science, its main responsibility is to learn causal relation, and from there, we hope that we could have some idea what complexity can do, the whole breadth of it. We know that we don't understand everything in detail, and we don't predict things accurately from our lack of understanding of details. But it has been adequate to lead the whole civilization move forward. Technology, on the other hand, has got elements of science built in it, and it has the responsibility, or it is assigned responsibility to solve problems, keep growing with civilization. So it's catching up with all the growing problems. But technology also manifests imagination in the sense that it's not only trying to solve problems, but it tries that imagination is not only in the realm of unrealistic. Some of them are realized in technology. People have flown to the moon. People have communication across the ocean. And those were things that people imagined 100 years ago. People rely on technology to realize their hope, to extend their life, for example. But we also seeing that technology is a way to manifest ideas that maybe some of us still consider as frivolous, like space tourism, for example. So there are many things that technology does on the surface for humanity. Now, art catches all of them, but being the one closer to the human, art understands people perhaps better. It understands how fast or how slow we want to move forward. It controls the dynamic of culture, all by listening to the inner longing. So with all those simple elaboration, I was thinking that it is need that all science, technology, and art perceive. And if we see rather clearly, addressing people's need has been the primary drive that moves civilization forward. So with this, I seem to identify for my own self that the common denominator for science, technology, and art in their role in civilization is the perception of me. So with that, then I asked myself, what else could be the common denominator between the three? I was thinking about beauty. Beauty is something that all of us could perceive. And in particular, art, science, and technology has beauty as an essential element in it. But what is beauty? I don't know. But if I could perhaps just list, would it be states that we prefer? It would be balance, harmony, elegance, symmetry, or could it be non-things that escape our sensory, but our mind could grasp, although perhaps not comprehend? Ideas like infinity, infinitesimal, silence, just void, emptiness. We have those in our vocabulary, although not necessarily have a clear understanding, clear definition. Beauty also elements that we could identify in process, in acts. And there are just several gerunds that I list that I think constitute beauty: searching for what's lost, revealing the hidden, enabling emergence and growth, bridging the otherwise uncompromised ends, braving the weather, trusting promises, many others. Love. I guess we have endless list of beauty that we could perhaps recognize. So I think beauty would be another common denominator for art, science, and technology that we could perhaps elaborate further. So with all those common ingredients, I look around me and recognize our largest environment, the universe, where we all come from, where I've been assigned to happily learn. The universe, for us, learning physical cosmology, some of us consider it as meaningless. It's just a whole process, a long whole process with various probabilities taking place. But we humankind has made it meaningful. It is a kind of meaning which perhaps is anthropocentric. We don't know of any other life existing in this universe. So we just living in small spot in the universe, trying to make sense of all of this, make sense of our relation. It is no wonder that anthropocentric becomes embodied in our culture without really realizing it. The universe also is a place, a grand place where we know what we know what we don't know, but also we don't know whether there are many other things that we still don't know. So it is a place where we are united in this incomprehension about the vastness, about the beauty. It is amazing that people from generations before us perceive the universe as grand, as beautiful, even though they just look at the universe with their own eyes. Still, they already know, they already feel that the universe is grand, is majestic. It means that they could relate, even though it is very remote. Now, in a more pragmatic, practical relation, the heavenly bodies, the earth, the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars, the constellation that move very, very regularly, provide reliable references for human to navigate through space, through time. And we've got calendar, we've got the rituals around calendars, we've got culture that's centered around this regularity. So the universe and us are, through our own perception, related. Now, returning to our home, Earth, it is, for me, myself, amazing that astronomy bring us a whole new perspective. When we return to Earth after understanding the universe, after understanding our sun in reference to other stars, our Earth in reference relative to other planets, we have better appreciation of our Earth. And we have better understanding all the text by the nature of nature. There are various constituents in this universe on Earth, from the very small to the very great. And there are all sort of span of time, something that just done in an instant, something that never seemed to change. And despite the assignment, or what people commonly think of science being exact, science is rarely exact. Science rarely offers anything exact, but it does a lot of estimates, and we live on that. Further, we live on uncertainties, on probabilities, and we could identify some regularities, some pattern within chaos. So I guess learning astronomy allows us to see that in a rather bird view, if you will, but something that you look from afar and you could see pattern. And within those patterns, we see that which one are our creation, which one are nature's. So it is not new that people has proposed that let us use astronomy, the whole universe, as a common ground to contemplate. We are taught to ask meaningful questions, like this little boat, many other boats leaving the harbor, each of them loaded with questions, and they are brave enough to sail to the vast ocean, the deep water, to look for answers. They may return, some of them, to bring back the answers. Some of them would even go further with deeper question. And with that, we are allowed to explore our mind, not just the universe, but having the universe as a reflector that would give our mind some kind of reference on what is possible. And the possibility of imaginations that we mentioned in the beginning, the universe seemed to house all of that. But living on Earth, we are taught to be contented with what we have on Earth and be, I don't know what would be the right word, but to really appreciate, realize how exquisitely beautiful Earth is. And it's probably made beautiful because of the constraints. And to be able to feel peace with that is a grand feeling. And with that, with the constraints, technology, for example, progress with constraints. Everything progresses with constraints. So therefore, I think that the possibilities, the new endeavor that is awaiting us is for us to create within constraints, but also understanding there is beauty in there. Working together is now more important ever than before. It's precisely because complexity has progressed so much in humanity. It has reached a level that we have never seen before. The impacts, many of them are reversible, whether it's on our own life, but it's also on Earth. So with that, we need to return to ourselves, return to the very core of humanity, and perhaps keep it aground, and finding the balance that we were looking in the beginning. But it is a core that we need to realize it's keep on changing, perhaps. So that is the first challenge, to find, to understand, to identify this new balance, this new core. So it is part of the challenge is to face the new reality with courage. It seems to be trivial, but it is not. This new reality should be perceived commonly, at least by some of us, because that is for humanity. That is not for us individually. But looking at history, looking at how we could see light coming from behind, just like history, we have to be optimistic that it is possible. It is challenging, but it is possible. Realizing that we are so diverse, but we also have lots in common. And it is what defines human. It is the nature of humanity. So, in closing, I would perhaps emphasize that the three of us, art, science, and technology, could put together a holistic side. And it is started by realizing a new kind of reality, new revelation of reality, which must be addressed by putting together a well-phrased question. And it's a reality that we all could comprehend and live in. And in order to do that, the three of us, art, science, and technology, should start with ourselves to recognize one another's need, to complement one another, not only in community and larger group, but within ourselves. At this point, I also like to acknowledge that there have been growing movement in putting art, science, and technology, mathematics, and engineering in an integrated idea we call STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I've been very, very fortunate to be involved in these movements. And I guess we could elaborate more on that. We could open up a new endeavor, be creative about it, but it is that I feel and I've seen, I've witnessed that working together, beauty is revealed, and it's a kind of beauty that each of us alone cannot reveal. And together we can also identify the need that maybe if I myself look at it, would think of it only frivolous. What I think is frivolous, maybe some other people's need. So by working together, I hope this need is supported. Also by thinking and working together, I hope we progress together and everyone will be on board. I guess that will be all I had to say this morning. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and I hope to really learn from you. Thank you. I'll stop my share screen.
Thank you very much, Ibu Nana. That was a very profound and very inspiring presentation. I think one of the most inspiring ones that I've tuned into for this year. It's the kind that kind of like transcends everything that we know, into kind of like a place where it touches the soul. And your reflections on the intersections of art, science, and technology from the universe and us as its guests, I'm pretty sure that's the term that we should use, that we are the guests at this universe, have really made me feel humbled, I guess, personally. And I think many other people joining in today feel that as well. So thank you very much, Bu Nana, and I hope you stay well and safe. Okay, so next we have 3 speakers from the Australian side, from the Australian National University. First off are Peter Swanton and Dr. Brett Tucker, who are going to continue their reflections on astronomy, indigenous people, and different ways of acquiring knowledge. So maybe before they come into the screen and to join me, I'm going to read their bios for a bit. So Peter Swanton is a Gamilarae man from Mackay, Queensland. So I'm sorry for the bad pronunciation. Peter graduated from the Australian National University in 2019 with a Bachelor of Science, majoring in physics, specializing in astronomy and astrophysics. Peter's work in astronomy initially began with research around black holes and cosmology, but he has since shifted focus to cultural astronomy and dark sky preservation. Peter's work will highlight the scientific importance of indigenous star knowledges and what we need to do in order to preserve these knowledges on country as well as in the night sky. And Brett Tucker is an astrophysicist and cosmologist. He's leading programs using the NASA's Kepler Space Telescope and TESS to understand why and how stars blow up. He's also building a network of ultraviolet telescopes in the upper atmosphere, as well as a search to find Planet 9. Brad frequently gives talk to school groups and general public about astronomy and chatting with the media about astronomy news and events. Brad has also developed a series of astronomy coins with the Australian Mint and consulted on science fiction movies. He is currently in the process of writing his first book. So please welcome Peter Swanton and Dr. Brett Tucker. You're here with me. So I'm so excited to kind of like just continue the reflection that Bunana has started with the more kind of like grounded perhaps and more relevant to the people where we live. And so without further ado, I'm just the screen, Brad and Peter.
Great, thank you. And so I will continue the conversation, then I'll follow after.
Sorry, I think your voice is breaking, is it? I don't know if it's coming from your microphone, maybe perhaps.
Maybe. Peter will take over.
Okay.
I'll follow after.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start off first. Cool. So thanks for having me. So my name's Peter Swanton. I'm a Gamilaroi man from here in Australia. And I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of sort of cultural astronomy in terms of an Australian and particularly a sort of Southern Hemisphere perspective and some of the stories and some of the things that we've known about and sort of observed for the last 60,000 years and really start to look at this connection between culture and science and art and really highlight the fact that these are all sort of interconnected within our culture. And I always like to start with this story here. So this is the story of the Southern Cross, because it's quite a well-known constellation here in the Southern Hemisphere. It features on the Australian flag, the New Zealand flag, and stuff like that. And in our culture, so this constellation is called Yaran. And Yaran is the Gamilaroi word for red gum tree, and that features heavily in this story as well. And so this story is the story of the first man to die on Earth. And so in the beginning, there were two men and a woman, and they were sort of shown how to live off the earth. So they were shown the trees that provided them with the food that they needed to survive, the watering holes that they could go to for water and everything that they needed. But then as time went on, the earth began to change and the trees stopped providing food and the watering holes began to dry up. And it got to the point where one of the men and the woman, they were so desperate that they seen a wallaby hopping by. And they thought, I want to kill and eat that wallaby. I'm so desperate for food. And the third man goes, you can't do that. The wallaby is our totem. We don't kill our totems. We don't eat our totems. But the first man and the woman, they were so desperate that they killed the wallaby and they ate it. And this caused a lot of distress for the third man. And so he ran and he ran and he ran until he couldn't run anymore. and he fell at the base of the Iran, the red gum tree. And the spirit that lived within the tree, he seen that the man had done the right thing, that he hadn't eaten his totem. And so he opened up the trunk of the tree and he took in the man's body and he took the tree up into the sky. And as the tree sort of faded into the background, all that was left were the eyes of the spirit and the eyes of the man. And they make up the four main stars of the Southern Cross constellation over here. But there's two other stars in this picture here that are closely associated with the Southern Cross, and those are the pointer stars down here. Because the Iran, the red gum tree, was home to two white cockatoos. And seeing their home being taken up into the sky, they decided to follow it. And so if you actually look at the Southern Cross constellation, these two pointer stars throughout the year, they actually rotate throughout the sky. And these two white cockatoos are forever chasing their home across the sky. And now we can look at the importance of this, because as an oral tradition culture, the main reason for these stories was a way of memorizing important information that needed to be passed on from one generation to the next. And the first level of this story, it explains the physical existence of things. So how the Southern Cross constellation came to be in the sky. Why when you strike a red gum tree that it bleeds red, representing the blood of the first man to die on Earth. And also why when you stand beneath the tree and the wind passes through the tree, you hear the howling of the first man to die on Earth. Sorry, the spirit that lives within the tree, sorry. The second level of this, it explains important sort of ceremonial aspects of our culture. So this explains the importance of the red gum tree within burial law. And it's actually the main sort of conduit in which your sort of spirit is taken into the sky as you pass on. And then it also explains the death of the first man on Earth. And the third level, it explains the relationship between community, so us as people, and the greater environment. So our relationship with our totems and our relationship with the Earth, and the way in which we need to treat things properly so that things don't change, and that we can always have a renewable sort of food source and water sources and all of those sort of important aspects. And now when we look at the Southern Cross story, we think of that as in the same way that we look at sort of traditional constellations. So you're sort of connecting the dots between the stars to form these pictures. And an important distinction in sort of Indigenous astronomy to like Aboriginal astronomy here in Australia is this idea of what we call dark constellations. And so these use the dark spaces between the stars to actually form those pictures. And so what we've got here in this picture is the Milky Way galaxy, as you're sort of looking at it from Earth, looking towards the center of our galaxy. And the word for this one is Warrnambool. So that roughly translates to big river or stream. And it highlights an important aspect in that everything that we see in the sky was reflected here on Earth. So for us, we could use what we saw in the sky to tell us what's happening here on Earth. And that brings me to this story, which is the story of the emu in the sky. So in our case, this is Gawarge is the name of the emu in the sky. But there are many variations of this story. So there are Wiradjuri people, which is a neighboring country to Gamilaroi, or even the Gadigal people, which is down in Sydney Way. They all have their versions of this emu in the sky story. And this is a really interesting story because it uses the picture of the emu throughout its various points through the year to tell us what's happening with the emus here on Earth. And so we can use this one as a little bit of a calendar. And so this first image here is the first appearance of the emu throughout its cycle. And this happens early in the year, around April or May. And so from this one, you can sort of see it's like an emu running. So it looks like an emu in full sprint. And so what this signified to us was the female emu chasing the male emu. So that's how we knew that it was the emu's breeding season. And so we could go out and we could hunt the eggs as a source of food, as a vital source of food. And then again, as the year sort of goes on and the sky rotates, you now have the emu sort of tilted now, and its sort of head is facing down towards the Earth. And we can no longer see the legs of the emu, only the head and its body are left. And this happens in the middle of the year, so June, July. And what this signified was the male emu sitting on the nest. And so that's how we knew that the eggs were beginning to hatch. And so very soon we'd need to stop hunting the eggs so that the emu population didn't die out and lived on. And so we had that sustainable food source for next year, respecting the animals and respecting that sort of natural cycle. And then again, as the sky keeps moving, the emu gets very low in the sky. The Milky Way is just sort of visible above the horizon. This is late in the year, so October, November. So this time of year. And that's now where you can just see the body of the emu just peeking up above the horizon. And so what this signified was the emu with its head in the watering hole. And that's how we knew that the watering holes were full, but the dry season was incoming. And so we would have to make those preparations so that when the dry season was here and the watering holes dried out, that we were able to sort of get through those times and get through again. And again, the cycle kept going. And eventually the emu disappears from view entirely. And that meant that the emus had left the watering hole, that the watering holes were now empty, and that we had to wait again now until the emu reappeared at the start of the year. And so you can see just from this sort of story, taking what we see in the sky and using that to inform us of what's happening here on Earth. So combining that observational astronomy aspect of things with the cultural significance and importance to our survival and our continuation of our culture here on Earth. Now this next one that I have up here is a real sort of demonstration of the combination of art and sort of culture and scientific observation. And so what we've got on the screen here is a couple of art pieces from Uncle Segar Passy. So Uncle Segar is a Meriam man from the Torres Strait Islands, which is the little island nation between sort of mainland Australia and Papua New Guinea. And this looks at moon phases and the sort of the tie between the phases of the moon and the seasons and the weather and those sort of observations. And so if we look at this picture on the right here, so this picture was called Meb Metalug M, which was this particular phase of the Meriam sort of moon cycle. And if we look at some of the features of this artwork, you can see the very large clouds. These are cumulus clouds. And you can sort of see, if you have a look at the water, it's very choppy. It's got some waves. You can sort of see the white tops of those waves. And the moon is in a very interesting position here. So you can sort of see it's a crescent moon, and it sort of looks like a bit of a bowl. And so what at this point in the moon's phase and at this part of the story, that's when they say that the rain was falling, and it was actually falling into the moon. And so the moon was actually filling up like a bowl, filling up with water. And so this meant that this was the sort of beginning of the dry season. And so none of the rain was actually reaching the Earth now because the moon was sort of capturing it all. And then this one here, so this is Meb Yuag M. We can sort of see the subtle changes in this one from that last one. And so we can see here we've now got these thin cirrus clouds. And the waters are much calmer. You don't see that choppy sort of white tops of the waves. It's very sort of flat and mirror-like. And we can now see that the moon that was a bowl shape before is now tilted on its side. And so at this point in the story, that was when all that water that had been building up in the moon over the dry season was now being tipped out of the moon, and it was now coming down and reaching Earth. And so this was actually the start of the monsoon season. And so that's how they knew that the rains were going to come. And so they had to make preparations for that, because you didn't want to be caught out on the ocean, out on the reef or anything in your boats during monsoon season, because it would be disastrous. And this is really cool observations, because now in sort of Western science, we understand that the seasons are formed by the tilting of the Earth. So as the Earth tilts one way, the northern hemisphere gets more sunlight, and that's summer and sort of winter here. And then as it sort of tilts back the other way, then you get less sunlight in the northern hemisphere and more in the southern hemisphere, and that's when the seasons have changed. And so that sort of tilting of the Earth actually tilts the appearance of the crescent moon in the sky. And so we can see here some really cool artistic representations of some, really sort of fundamental scientific observations and scientific understandings that are integral to the culture's survival and their everyday life, and it informs their practices around fishing and all of those things that are integral to survival. And then if that wasn't enough to sort of really convince you of the scientific importance of cultural astronomy, then this story, and this is the one that I'll sort of finish on here. This is one of my favorite stories. And this one looks at variable stars. And so variable stars are these stars that vary their brightness, and they can vary by magnitudes over relatively short periods of time. So days or weeks or months, they can get much brighter or much more dim. And this is really important observations because it's something that in sort of Western models of cosmology really didn't start showing up until sort of like 17th century philosophers and sort of cosmologists started talking about this. So it's only been for the last, few hundred years that it's really been sort of looked at in Western science. And yet here we have an example of observations of variable stars embedded within our culture that's been happening for thousands of years. And so this uses the constellation Orion, which is this constellation here on the left of this picture. So you can see Orion's belt here in the middle. And much like his Greek counterpart, this is also the story of a feared hunter named Nairuna. Now, Nairuna was a fearsome hunter, but he wasn't a very good man. He was a bit of a womanizer. And one day he decided that he wanted to take one of the sisters, the Eugorilia, to be one of his wives. And so the Eugorilia are represented by the Pleiades cluster over on the very right-hand side of this picture. And so he chases them across the sky, and he really just wants to sort of make the youngest one his wife. And the eldest sister, Kambugutta, actually gets word of this, and she won't allow it. And so she places herself between Nairuna and the sisters, and she's represented by this cluster of stars in the middle, the Hyades cluster. And so she begins to taunt Nairuna and sort of won't let him get past and get to her younger sisters. And this angers Nairuna because, he's a fearsome hunter and no one should dare stand up to him. And so in his anger, he raises his club, and his club is filled with fire magic. And that's represented by this bright star at the top of the screen here, which is Betelgeuse, which is one of these really interesting variable stars. And so he raises his club, and as Betelgeuse sort of flares up, his fire magic is flaring up as he begins to prepare his attack. But Kambugutta actually has fire magic of her own, and that's represented by this star in the middle of the screen here. This is Aldebaran, another one of these giant red variable stars. And so she returns fire, and there's this back and forth battle between Nairuna and Kambugutta and this flaring of fire magic. And for me, it's just a really powerful representation of the observational scientific astronomy that's contained within traditional knowledges. And so a hope of what I want to do with my work is sort of find ways to open the dialogues between Indigenous knowledges and Western science knowledges, and really just begin to form a more sort of rich and full picture of our cosmos as a result of it. So yeah, thank you for listening for that, and I'll now pass it over to Brad.
Thanks, Pete. Hopefully my mic is fine now. Not sure what happened earlier. I'll just share my screen. And this follows well from what Pete was just talking about, because the way we visualize things in space is so reliant on art. You can't separate them. And I think that's the amazing thing about this discussion, is that everything we do when we look up to the skies, whether it was 10, 20, 30, 60,000 years ago, as Pete was just talking about, or today, it's all about how we visualize it to gain meaning from those visualizations. And I think there's lots of opportunities going forward between astronomy and the visual arts in order to keep this up. And a great example is this photo. So this is where Pete and I are based at Mount Stromlo Observatory. So this is part of the ANU. ANU has 2 observatories, and this one is just outside Canberra. And this is a beautiful nighttime sky. And we get to see the Milky Way, part of which Pete was just talking about. The Emu isn't up because it's February. We get to see Orion and Betelgeuse that Pete just mentioned. We get to see distant galaxies even in this image. But if you look here on the left, so this image is taken facing west from Stromlo. And so we see the south on the left and the north on the right. And you may think, oh, that's the sun. Well, no, that's not the sun. This photo was taken at 2 a.m. This is just lights from neighboring city. This is just light pollution. This is humans changing the environment. And in the discussions that we're having globally, including right now, about how do we limit and fix the impacts that humans are having on the world, this is a very visual way of showing that. You're showing that humans, and not for mean purposes, but in our unknowing, are changing the way we encounter the universe, as we are hearing earlier. We're changing the way we encounter Earth. And this has very practical consequences, but it also has very scientific consequences in how we measure astronomy. And we could simply just tell people, oh, lights are not very good for an observatory, please turn them off. But if you get to show them this photo, which should be completely dark, and this yellow bit shouldn't be there, but get to say with your own eyes, this is what lights can do to the nighttime sky. And that light requires energy, and that energy is an impact on the environment. It's a way of connecting a message that may be hard to understand, or maybe people just wouldn't pay attention to. And this is a great example of the impact that astronomy and art can have. It's not even in astronomy or art, but potentially other fields as well. And so for reference, Mount Stromlo is where we work, but we also maintain Siding Spring Observatory, which is in northern part New South Wales and Gamilaroi country, as Pete was just talking about. And it's a very dark, remote spot, and I'll talk about it in a bit later. But one of the things that we're also doing is, how do we experience and get the full measurements and the full experience and data and science as we explore around us? And it was mentioned, one of the things that I do with some colleagues here is we launch balloons up into space. Now, this is a telescope on a balloon, and it's not really doing much. It's just kind of bouncing around. It is choppy on purpose. But one of the things that we'll be able to do is, working with the School of Music, I'll be quiet for a second so you can hear. You may just be able to hear some rustling, some very light wind. It's very quiet. At 40 kilometers above the Earth, it's very quiet. And you almost miss it if you're not tuning in. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, we'd like to put these telescopes on balloons because it allows us to get almost into space. If you look, we see the blackness of space. We see the Earth below. It allows us to see colors of light that we can't see from the ground. We're actually getting above the ozone. Now, this is a very technical plot, but don't worry. The orangey or the greeny yellow bit is the ozone that is in our atmosphere. It blocks ultraviolet light from the sun. So if you get above it, you see this color of light that we can't see from the ground. And this is very important for astronomy. It quite literally allows us to see the universe in a different way from standing on the ground. But at the same time, the atmosphere has quite literally changed. Our experience of the atmosphere has changed. The measurements of the atmosphere have changed. And so by going up that high, you get to experience a new world. Now, if I play the same video.
Recording in progress.
But now from Ken Cunha at the School of Music, you get to feel that you're now in a surreal experience. You get to feel that you're in a different experience. And so it's a great example of how using all of our senses, I'll just stop it so people don't get dizzy, how all of our senses can allow us to experience the universe in a little bit of a different way. And this is important because in astronomy, we rely so heavily on visual representations of our science, seeing things, plotting them, using the images to measure things. But there's a huge amount of people all across the world who are visually impaired. How do we interact? How do we serve? How do we communicate with those people? This is a big issue. And this is a big area now that we're trying to solve. How do we communicate science that is reliant on visuals to people who cannot see them? And by simply using audio, by sonifying the data, changing the visuals to sounds, we can give that experience to people who may normally miss out. And that is just another part of how astronomy and the arts, visual or other, can come together to change the way we interact in the universe. And it's a necessity. We need to do these things if we're going to be successful in the science and the work that we do. Now, one of the projects I work on is the Kepler Space Telescope. And this is what an image looks like. This is an actual image from a space telescope. Now, you may be wondering, this looks just so confusing and terrible. It is. Because the telescope itself is not set up to take pretty pictures. It's set up to measure very small changes in light. And each color square is a little bit different measurement of light. Now, you don't need to understand what this is showing, but how do we communicate the power of actually what is in this image to people who are not used to dealing with these images? We need the graphic arts. Without it, we cannot communicate that science. So this is this image changed. And what we have seen is on the right here, this little light is that telescope takes an image every few minutes. And we were able to see the very first moments a star exploded. And we saw the shock wave escape and blow up. We saw the birth of the death of a star. And in the death of a star, it actually comes together to form new elements. The universe recycles itself. The elements in our body and our solar system have come from other things. We're literally connected to the universe, kind of as we heard of earlier. And it's a very amazing scientific discovery that we're able to see the exact moment and how a star over 100 million light years away exploded. But if I just showed people this image, it wouldn't really look like much. We needed to take this image, understand the data on the right, and use visual art to explain that message. And here is where lots of opportunities go forward. In the era of telescopes becoming online, where we're constantly surveying the southern sky. For instance, Sky Mapper at Siding Spring or other dark sky site. Here's part of the EMU and the Milky Way above. And this telescope is constantly imaging the nighttime sky. It's taking images every night robotically, and it's putting together a digital catalog of the entire southern sky. But how we take those images depends on what we want to do with them. There's lots of science we can do with them, but there's also lots of ways people can interact and connect to them, again, with these visuals that maybe aren't just simply as data from the telescope. Because this is kind of what data from the telescope looks like. It's black and white. We can see it get deeper or more detailed, the fainter or further or longer we look. But humans are a very visual subject. How do we change these beautiful images that scientifically are important into images we can appreciate but still get meaning? And we can color them. When a telescope takes an image, we take colors in blue light or green or red light. And here's a great example of this. These are actually 3 images stuck together at different times. So we took 3 images and we took them at slightly different times over the course of a couple days and a week. And we labeled one image red, one image green, and one image blue. And what do you notice? The things that don't change look mostly white. But do you notice things like here, red, green, blue? That is the same object moving across the solar system over a few days. Our eye naturally can see these different colors. You can clearly see a green dot and a blue dot here and a red dot here. Our eyes can pick up these minute differences in color very, very effectively. And it's the same way the image was before, but we just color coded it. We made it a different visual representation so we can find new things in the universe and allow the public, anyone, to actually find these new things in the universe. And again, this is the power of being able to visualize our data in different ways. So I think it's a great example of we can take our data, our science, our images, make them in a visually appealing way, and then make scientific discoveries. It is not that it's one or the other, they are intertwined. And so this is one of the things that going forward in this era of lots of images and lots of data, the way we have the public, what we call citizen science, engage with the data, the way citizen science, the way the public sees the images and sees the universe is important, not just to our understanding, but to our discovery and everyone's as well. Because that sometimes is looking at completely different colors of light. So here's a great example of what Jupiter, one of the gas giants in our solar system, looks like. And this is what it looks like through a telescope. If you take a telescope, this is kind of what Jupiter looks like. But on the right is in the infrared. So this is a completely different color of light humans cannot see. Think night vision, or thermal vision. And you can see Jupiter in a completely different way. So we can visualize the same object in different ways, but we still have to show this image to people. We still have to interpret this infrared color so people can see it. But we can make profound impacts and statements by doing so. And what do I mean by that is, so this is Jupiter in the infrared. And so this was taken at Siding Spring Observatory. So here's Jupiter. Here's the Great Red Spot. This is one of the moons of Jupiter. And if I just play this video, you see a bright flash. I'll play it again. Now, this bright flash isn't a moon. This is an explosion. In 1994, a comet slammed into Jupiter, and it created a hole 12,000 kilometers wide, about the size of the Earth. But we were able to capture this. Peter McGregor, who was an astronomer at Mount Stromlo, built this instrument and captured this. We're able to see a massive change to the solar system, but in a different color of light. So these are the sorts of important things. We not only learn different things, but as I've said before, the universe, humans can experience it in very different ways. And this is what our future is about. If we're going to experience more of the universe, if we want more people to understand it, if we want more people to care about how we see the universe, how we see astronomy, how we understand our place in it, it is going to be the way we connect our images and science and data to how people can see them. Because without it, it will be a big missing piece in connection and understanding that is essential for humanity. And, you know, we heard brilliantly about how important and how connected we are to Earth. And so if we want to keep that up, if we want to show that message, if we want to understand that message, if we want to feel that connectedness, astronomers need to work with the visual artists and scientists and photographers and all of those people to make sure we can clearly communicate our place in the universe. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Peter and Pak Brad. I think listening to your presentations, it all comes down to how science and scientific innovations are communicated, and also vice versa, for science to be more open to other ways of acquiring knowledge. And by starting that dialogue, I think hopefully we can all work towards a better and more inclusive humanity, like how you and also Bunana and also Pak Rikrik have mentioned before. It needs an integrated sort of effort rather than very sporadic efforts like maybe we are still doing now, but we're kind of like moving away from. Thank you very much again, Pak Brad and Pak Peter. Our last speaker for the morning session is Dr. Anna Madeline Raupach. Ibu Anna Madeline is an artist working with AR, VR, drawing, animation, and installation to explore intersections between art and science. So we are coming sort of towards the art part of the discussion. Her current practice focuses on expressing alternative forms of temporality related to climate change. She has a PhD in media arts from UNSW Art and Design in 2014 and is right now at ANU School of Art and Design. She has had solo exhibitions in New York, Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra, Montreal, and Bandung, and participated in residencies with Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, Bandanon Trust in New South Wales, Common Room Networks, foundations throughout Asia Link Arts, here in Bandung, I think, and the School of Cinematic Arts, University of Southern California, Los Angeles. So please welcome Ibu Anna. Hello.
Hello, thank you, Ibu Ari.
Yes,
and thank
so
you very much.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the screen for you to start your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you so much to Ibu Nana and Brad and Peter for your talks so far this morning. I think there's so many exciting connections between them that I hope to discuss in the Q&A session. But for now, I will share my screen. So hopefully you can all see this. Today I'm going to speak about interdisciplinary arts practice with a focus on my own work, but also some others. With my own work, I'll focus on two projects that I have recently worked on in relation to astronomy. One in Bandung in 2017 that has developed since, and a new one that I'm currently completing, which is slightly different, but related in some really interesting ways that I'll discuss. So prior to my residency in Indonesia, I worked on some art and science collaborative projects with different disciplines, for example, with the chemistry department of Melbourne University and the anatomy department at ANU Medical School. But today I'll introduce my background in this kind of interdisciplinary area through the work that I made in my Asia Link Arts residency, which was with Common Room Networks Foundation, working closely with Pak Gustav, and this was in 2017. So these projects, when I mentioned my interest in science and the previous projects that I had done in interdisciplinary arts to Pak Gustav, he introduced me to Ibu Nana at Boschke Observatory. And this is where I first developed a focus on astronomy and has led to the projects that I'll speak about today. I know a couple of our audience members today from ITB saw this exhibition, which was called The Other North at Orbital Dargo Gallery in Bandung. This was the culmination of the 3 months work that I did in Bandung through my residency with Common Room. And these works explored the relationship between everyday activities and cosmic cycles of time and space. So as you can see, this is kind of a really massive theme and concept. And I really admired how Ibu Nana spoke about this so profoundly in her talk earlier today. But these are themes that I've continued working on in different ways throughout my practice. And I feel that a focus on astronomy within my arts practice has really tied these different elements and interests together. So these works made during my residency were influenced by conversations with Ibu Nana at Boschke Observatory when I visited, and Gustav at Common Room, and the works draw connections between astronomical phenomena, navigation and the natural environment through installations, shadow play, animation, drawings and sculptural objects. They investigated how scientific inquiry infiltrates into cultural practices, as well as agricultural knowledge and also people's understanding of time. Looking back at this residency and the exhibition 4 years later, as I was putting this talk together, it was really nice to see how this initial research kind of planted the seed for much of the work that I've made since. And the processes and works that developed have been revisited in other new work that I'll discuss later without me really realising it at the time. But as an overview of this previous work, the exhibition at Orbital Dargo had 4 main components. Kalambu was a kinetic work made with fabric shapes stitched into mosquito nets. And this created a kind of alternative version of a screen that continuously spun with motors attached to the top of the objects. So when in motion, they become activated with multiple dimensions and inversions, for example, through the inside and the outside of the screens, the positive and negative space, and the light and shadow. These ideas are symbolic of many elements of astronomy, for example, the constant movements of turning planets and orbits, and light and darkness. And for my practice, it also speaks to a different form of moving image, taking my animation practice, which usually is seen on a digital screen, off that digital space and into the physical world in a material version of an animation loop that still cycles and spins. So the exhibition also had a darkened room with some light installations. I made these fragile paper helmets that also became miniature planetariums on which I mapped a sky projection by pricking tiny holes into the surface of these paper helmets. And in this work, I drew on mirrors and shone lights onto them to reflect the drawings onto the space around them. This process resonated with me for its association with technologies and materials used in telescopes, and it conveyed a sense of both distance and perspective and visibility and invisibility in using mirrors to see things in our everyday world, but also things out of this world from a different angle. And this is something that I will return to later. The use of reflections and shadows in all of these works began in reference to Wayang, but it grew to explore themes of astronomy, bringing in ideas of space and time on a much more universal scale, as well as in everyday life, and kind of connecting those two things together through materials and a visual language. The other main work that I made in my residency was based on the traditional calendar system called Pranata Mangsa that uses observation of the position of stars at different times of the year to plan agricultural practices and cultural events. So I felt really lucky to learn about this knowledge from Pak Gustav and also Ibu Nana, who introduced me to research around the Pranata Mangsa knowledge and also how it's changing due to climate change, which I thought was very interesting. So in conversation with Gustav, I created a hand-drawn animation depicting scenes of the calendar. The original version of the work, which you see here, played a scene-by-scene animation, which was on the left channel, alongside a second animation of a moving night sky. When I returned to Australia, I began to experiment with how augmented reality can layer digital and physical worlds together. And with AR, I experimented with how I could express the connection between cosmic and natural worlds in my practice generally. The AR artwork is made of a series of prints on paper that depict constellations, taken from astronomy simulations of specific times in the year when the Pranata Mangsa seasons change. The app is programmed to detect these sky maps and in response play the animation scene that portrays one of the environmental activities associated with the night sky at that time. So I found that AR, and thinking about Ibu Nana's comments on technology in this kind of relationship that we're discussing today, for me, AR introduced a new alternative version of time in the animation work because the calendar system no longer has to play out in order. So I presented the prints in a horizontal line to suggest a linear structure, but the viewer can choose which order they see the scenes in. So in this sense, AR detaches the moving image from its original timeline. And this suggests a relationship between the universe, our planet, and us as humans that is interlinked, but also potentially unstable. So a little bit of reference to some other artists that work with art and astronomy, because I think there's a lot of work being done in this area at the moment, and it's important to build context for how the two disciplines can come together in different ways, which we're already seeing today, which is really exciting. So these are just a few examples. Leah Halloran is an American artist who works with the cyanotype method of photography. So this process involves exposing an image using UV light. And she worked with that way to explore the narrative of women known as Harvard computers, which is relevant to some new work that I'll discuss soon. Jonathan Jones is a member of the Wiradjuri and Kamilaroi peoples of Southeast Australia. The work shown here refers to the history of astronomer William Dawes, who arrived on the First Fleet and was taught the local Aboriginal language by a young woman, Pichigorang, from the Eora Nation. So Jones uses fluorescent tubing to represent charting of both language and the night sky to reference this narrative in his work. And American artist James Turrell is known for his sky spaces that create a dedicated space to observe the sky with special consideration to human perception of light and colour. A couple more examples. UK-based artist Melanie King considers how light from incredibly distant stars can be captured directly onto photosensitive film through an investigation of astronomy and analogue photography evolving together. And Scottish artist Katie Patterson works with scientists to consider the natural environment, specifically in the context of deep time. Her work here, Totality, transfers images of eclipses throughout time onto the surface of a mirror ball. And I was influenced in this in my works that also use mirror to activate that reflective kind of mode. So these works show how art is instrumental in creating interpretations of astronomy, and I should specify their visual arts because I think Brad's example of music is also really important. But art and music can do this by bringing audio and physicality and poetics to abstract concepts, and by expressing alternative narratives using physical materials, evoking emotional responses, and telling stories. So as Peter showed us earlier, this is not new, and Ibu Nano also demonstrated this. But I believe it's important to keep cultivating this more nuanced interpretation of astronomy in interdisciplinary arts practice, because it has a lot to offer our understanding of the world in so many ways. So the next work that I will speak about is a newer work of mine. It's a work that I'm currently completing through a research fellowship at the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences in Sydney, which is also connected to Sydney Observatory. And this work has two parts that I'll discuss, a physical installation and also a mixed reality experience. The project is based on the Astrographic Catalogue, which was an international project to map the sky that began in 1887 and continued until the mid-1960s in Australia. And this occurred at Sydney, Melbourne and Perth observatories. So this project of mine takes a different perspective than the other one that I just showed by exploring colonial practices and associated technologies and processes of mapping the sky. But I'm interested in not only what these processes did and do, but also what they left out, and revealing this through artistic methodologies. So I came across the Astrographic Catalogue and read about how women played an important role by working as star measurers on this global scientific endeavour. And I'm interested in the Astrographic Catalogue for several reasons. Firstly, that the women weren't sufficiently recognised for their contribution. Tona Stevenson's PhD provides detailed documentation of their working conditions and reveals an important record of the extent of their work that wasn't adequately represented previously. Secondly, the methods of observation and representation changed throughout the cataloguing project as photography took over from manual processes. And I'm interested in this change in practice and thinking that resulted from the power in the process shifting from the observer to the instrument. In my work, I'm also interested in the intersection at which these human and technological methods meet, and looking at the kind of friction between them. And finally, I'm interested in exploring drawing and the hand-drawn line through handwriting as an access point into this assemblage of machine and human authors, and also as a way to highlight and give new light to the women themselves and their identities. So part of my process has been capturing signatures and notations to work with. So at the museum and at Sydney Observatory, I looked at the type catalogues, the handwritten notebooks, the glass plates and the measuring machines that were all part of the Astrographic Catalogue project. I was particularly drawn to the handwritten logbooks that contain these sort of long form calculations and scribbles and notes and signatures. For me, these marks captured a real sense of materiality that other materials didn't, and it also represents the women's identities that became lost in the official typed catalogue. So it's kind of looking at that gap between the handwritten process and what we see officially documented. So I found these hand-drawn marks and notations existing at the periphery of the data, sometimes just scrawled on notes and slipped into pages. They were sometimes deliberate and sometimes incidental, but some of these examples that I found particularly fascinating was this list of food on the image in the left, and a poem transcribed onto another slip of paper, and this drawing of a figure down in the right-hand corner. I thought that these examples help identify relationships to several different elements of the process. For example, the machines that they were using. This note says, Friday afternoon and Saturday instructing Miss Alexander on the Respold, which was a machine, one of the several machines that they used. And the references to errors, whether technological or human errors, such as observed with wrong focus. I really liked finding these notes because they represented and revealed clues to the women's lives at that particular moment in time. Glimpses of personal expression that come through in scraps of paper with poetry, drawings, and lists of food. Another thing to mention in this process was that a sense of personality emerged in the varying styles of handwriting that correspond to the signatures throughout the collection of books. So the handwriting connected specific gestural styles to the identity of certain women, and by photographing them over and over again, I felt I got to know these women from a big distance, but got to recognise their writing and connect them to the names through this process. So this involved photographing hundreds or probably thousands of logbooks of this handwritten data. And the first work that I'll describe is a physical, well, it will be a physical installation called Standard Stars, where samples of handwriting is laser etched onto the surface of a series of double-sided mirrors. I plan to make them mechanically rotate in a similar way to the Colombo mosquito nets, so that they're constantly moving in space. And they will be lit in ways that reflect the laser-etched imagery of the notes and signatures into the darkened area around them. And this will project the women's handwritten notes onto the surrounding surfaces. So here there is an important interplay between visibility and invisibility, because etching away the reflective surface allows the absence of the women's drawn marks to emerge, and to deliberately amplify the invisibility of the original work. This process is also a return to the process that I first developed in Indonesia. So it references mirrors in telescopes, but also the intimacy of a makeup mirror. The rotating movement mimics the cross-checking process that women carried out with glass plates when working in pairs. And it also visually alludes to, again, fundamental elements of cycles, orbits, and motions of light and shadow. So when I was looking into this aspect of drawing, here we go, this is, these images give a bit of a sense of what I hope the installation will look like when it's completed. But when I was looking into the connection between drawing and astronomy, I came across the work of Dutch astronomer Anton Panekowek. I may very well be saying that incorrectly. But he worked with a fascinating combination of methods to create visualizations of the Milky Way. And I'm particularly interested in his work because of the emphasis on drawing in his processes. But also, I was really excited to find out that he spent time at Boschke Observatory in Lembang, where I also spent time when I was in Bandung. And he worked there to make exposures and drawings in 1925 to 1926. So Panekowek brought together naked eye observation, photography, and drawing in his methods of illustrating astronomical phenomena. And he was really innovative in the way that he combined both scientific and aesthetic qualities in his work. He collected a combination of written descriptions and visual diagrams to make his work, but ultimately found that diagrammatic depictions were lacking in encompassing the Milky Way. Instead, he decided that observational charcoal drawings, which served no immediate scientific purpose, were crucial to include because of their ability to aesthetically represent the phenomena as seen by humans, not by machines. So Cheo-Kang Tai has written extensively about Penekowic's work, and in his book that I've referenced here, Omar Nassim also explores the importance of work done by hand in astronomy, including drawing. And he notes that unlike other sciences, the objects of study in astronomy exist at a distance, where the observer is separated from investigating them physically by hand and instead relies on their optical appearance through lenses, mirrors, and telescopes and screens. In works such as drawing, then, the sheer amount of time, concentrated acts of looking and recording with media such as charcoal form a profound relationship between the astronomer and the stars in what Nassim refers to as a process of coming to know the unfamiliar. And I think a lot of artists here today and students who have done drawing with charcoal would understand that relationship. So I found that Penekowic's work helps identify the prominence of working slowly by hand in either drawing or writing as a process and a tool for paying close attention to abstract phenomenon. Nassim also notes that the rise of photography caused this analogue work to be less valued and therefore undertaken by less experienced workers. So this comes back to the context of the astrographic catalogue, where the notebooks are a material artefact of the laborious work that women undertook as star measurers that represents this perception. So returning to the other part of my own work, just to finish up. So this second work, called Light Echoes, builds on my exploration of augmented reality as a mode through which to uncover unseen histories and affordances of the natural world. This work is based on the structure of a stargazing app that I'm sure many of you have used to look at the sky and see the constellations appear on the screen of the mobile device. In my work, though, I aim to layer those positions of the stars with the signatures of the women who mapped them to the astrographic catalogue. So these images here show the first iteration and the kind of testing that was done for this work, which was a digital mock-up of the mirror installation, but it also shows some of the scientific research that we were referencing to put this work together. So I worked with a developer, Peter Heyman, to do this technical side of the process. We mapped out the sky sections for each observatory, which you can see here, and used virtual spotlights to search the sky for signatures. This isn't depicting what the work will look like, but it's kind of the process that led us through dealing with this data to get to what will become the final project. As well as the signatures, I decided to represent the data according to the areas of sky captured in a photographic plate. This also helped me narrow down the scope of the project because, as usual with my work, I start way, way too broad and have to narrow down the amount of data that I work with. So this animation is compiled of a series of original images of photographic plates that viewers will see appearing in the sky along with the women's signatures. Part of the reason that this whole project has taken so long to complete, I can attribute some of it to COVID, but not all of it, unfortunately. But there has been a big cross-checking process in working with the sheer amount of data that I've collected and referencing the plate numbers with the signatures in the logbooks and matching that information up with the position in the sky in which I want the signatures to appear. So I'm doing this using a document called Volume 53, which is a summary of all the Sydney plates used in the astrographic catalogue, along with the hundreds of logbooks held in the mass collections that I showed some images of before. And with this combination of archival material, I am able to match up the signatures to the plates and locate the locations in the sky. So these last couple of slides are just some examples of what this work will look like. So as you can see here, the plate animation became an important window into different views of the sky. this example shows an effect that we're working with to give a 3D view of the stars when looking through that window that the plate gives. So this was a result of several conversations about how to represent space, and we decided to go with a combination of 2D and 3D forms, which I find really fascinating. In this version, patterns are emerging when the plates are positioned at the right point in space. So we're seeing the kind of circle, the ring that represents the section of sky that was measured from Sydney Observatory. So I'm imagining that when I have the correct signatures occurring on the plates at the right point in space, more patterns will emerge that may be also really interesting, such as which women work together more often than others because they worked in pairs, also which women mapped different parts of the sky. And I think this point is where this kind of aesthetic visualization that, again, going back to that point about the charcoal drawings, it serves no real scientific purpose at the time, but it becomes really exciting when these sort of patterns emerge unexpectedly. So I've aimed for the example shown today to demonstrate that art is particularly important in expressing the observation of natural and cosmic phenomena. And I hope that these works illustrate how art can evoke a new perception of time and space that informs speculations of the future, that also re-engages with past histories in new ways, and that also realigns contemporary timescales and natural cycles. And that's where I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Anna. I guess, like now that we have seen the examples of how the interdisciplinary effort is visualized through artworks that Ibu Anna have presented before, hopefully it becomes more relevant as well to many of our visual art students and encourages them to consider this type of works.